It is Thursday, January 20th, 2022 at 6:30 p.m. We are here at the District Service Center in Cottage Grove, Minnesota. As part of Policy 102.1, Racial Equity and Inclusion, which was approved on August 23rd, 2021, we would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the land of the Minnewacan Dakota people. Minnewacan means dwellers of the Spirit Lake. As part of this policy, we will be acknowledging this at future board and advisory team meetings. Our first item on the agenda is 1.0, roll call. Dana, will you call the roll?
Eric Tessmer.
Present.
Louise Hines.
Here.
Pat Driscoll.
Here.
Simi Petnaik.
Here.
Melinda Doles.
Here.
Katie Schwartz.
Here.
Sharon Van Leer.
Here. Next is our please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next, we have 3.0, the approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second. Seconded?
Louise.
All those in favor, we say by the sign of aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That motion passes. Next is 4.0, Student District Ambassadors Report, and that will be presented tonight by our Superintendent, Julie Newport.
Good evening and thank you. We are excited tonight to have 3 of our district youth ambassadors and parents and some siblings out there watching this board meeting. As a reminder for those in the audience and for our viewing public, each of our schools has a student ambassador group, and one of those individuals has applied and was chosen to serve as a district student ambassador. This evening we are excited to have Reese from Valley Crossing. Reese, you want to give a little wave? Amber Lemke from Newport Elementary School, and then Riya Bharti from East Ridge High School. And so for our 2 elementary students, what I'd like to do is just have a little conversation where I'm asking them some questions. We actually had our 3rd ambassador meeting today. So here goes, young ladies. Are you set? All right, so to start with, just to share with the board, and so your board members are over here, to share with the board, what is one of your favorite parts about 5th grade? Go ahead, Reese.
I really like the activities that we do during class and the more like hands-on work we get to do.
Okay, and so Reese, with that, what is one of the things that you have learned or found interesting about representing your school on the district ambassador group?
It's a really big responsibility, and it's really cool to be able to do it, and you get to meet new people.
Like the 3 friends or 2 friends you're sitting next to tonight, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, Amber, I'm just going to keep going with Reese, and then I'll come back to you. Today, Reese, we talked about what leadership was. What would you share about what leadership means to you?
You have to be able to have people trust you to lead them, and that's really important to be a leader.
Can you think of any other words that you saw come up today in the chat? Maybe what some of your friends may have said about leadership?
Trustworthy, kind, caring.
Mm-hmm. Bold and courageous, maybe too. Okay. In your breakout group today, you talked a little about this. First thought, last thought. So I'm just going to let people and our board members see first thought, last thought. And I'm not going to have you give it away, all right? But Reese, when you looked at this image, what was your first thought about this image? What was the picture of?
I thought it was a picture of a lady like winking.
Okay, so we're going to hold on that. We'll give Amber she'll get to uncover the other. First thought, last thought. You talked about a place that made you feel comfortable and calm. Can you share with the board, what was that place that made you feel comfortable and calm?
It was at my house.
Mm-hmm. And why did you choose your house?
Because that's where my family is, and my family really understands me and cares about how I feel.
Mm-hmm. Great. We also talked about, you had the chance to draw while our secondary friends were engaged with long-range facilities, a much bigger word. Our elementary students took time to talk about their ideal classroom. I actually left the group at that time to go with the secondary. So can you share what your ideal classroom looked like?
It was really comfortable and you were able to learn and focus really well. It had like beanbag chairs, like a station where you could like feel stuff and like fidget with stuff. And there was a lot of academic stuff in it too.
Was there any food? I didn't get to see the end result. Was there a refrigerator or anything in there?
No.
Okay, good. What have you enjoyed most? If you could pick one thing. So we've had 3 meetings now. We've talked about a couple of different things. What is one thing that you have enjoyed the most?
I really enjoyed making the posters and being able to show like what you think the saying on the posters or the quote means.
So I think the board is aware that we have various posters hanging up in our schools, and so we have chosen to have our students help with the creation of the sayings and how we have inclusive posters hanging throughout our schools. So thank you, Reese. Amber, I'm going to move on to you. Now it's your turn. Are you all set? What is your favorite part about 5th grade?
My favorite part about 5th grade is that I get to spend time with my friends and I get to learn a lot of stuff that I haven't learned yet, and that I have a lot of academic skills in my school, so I get to learn a lot of stuff that I'm going to learn in middle school, and it's really fun.
And Amber, what's your favorite class at Newport Elementary?
Probably music class or art class because I like to draw and I also like to sing.
Fabulous. So I'm going to hop ahead to that question. If you like to draw and sing, can you talk with the board about what your favorite part or what your ideal classroom looked like when you had that opportunity to create?
My ideal classroom would look like there would be a big table where everybody could sit and not just a bunch of desks where one person can sit. And there would be like an art corner, a reading corner, some class pets, and then like a social worker room where people can talk about their feelings if they feel sad.
Did you say a class pet? What kind of class pet would you recommend?
Fish.
Fish. Yes, fish sound really, really good. You talked about leadership today, and you got to type into the chat what you thought leadership meant. And what words did you use to describe what you felt leadership meant to you?
Good citizenship and good teamwork.
Okay. You also talked about a place that made you feel comfortable. You had to kind of step back and take a breath. What did that place look like, and what was the name of that place?
My house, because my family lives there and my family loves me, and I care about my family, and I just feel safe there.
It was really interesting and amazing how many of our students actually chose their own homes as that place. Some of us might choose the beach or water or somewhere else, but our kids certainly felt safe and secure at home. And finally, what have you enjoyed most about the experience of being coming to the district? And I know we've only had one meeting in person, but what have you enjoyed most about being with older kids and other kids in the district?
Learning about what it's like to be in high school and what it's like to be in middle school, and creating different posters and coming to the board meeting.
It's quite an honor to come to the board meeting. So Amber, just before we close, first thought, last thought, I'm just going to remove the hand. And so what the students got to see was that when you remove the hand, talk about what this is now.
It looks like somebody reaching for a fish in a pond.
So we wanted to make sure when all the pieces were uncovered, it was a person winking, but now it's a hand grabbing onto a plate with a fish. And so we just talked about first thought, last thought. Thank you so much. Riya, on to you. And I know you are a high schooler, so you are a Little Miss Independent, and I don't have to ask Riya questions. She's got this. And they had a fabulous session today. And they went through, Christine led them through the long-range facilities. Option A, B, and C are working options, and so our students had a lot to say. So Riya.
So just to recap on what we were meeting about. So recently at the District Youth Council, our focus has been preparing for future growth in our community. As many of you know, our district will gain over 3,000 students over the next 10 years, but we don't know how we're going to have space for all those students. At the last meeting, we dove into some of the issues in our schools right now and some future issues that we might have. However, today we went over 3 possible solutions that tackle both the current issues and future growth concerns. All of the solutions involved rearranging the use of district facilities and creating a new elementary school. Our discussion on the different options revolved more around kind of the plan for high school. So option A had an expansion for all three of the high schools. However, us secondary students, we believe that although this idea did not involve any boundary changes, there would be a lot of reworking and reshuffling of schedules for lunches, passing time, and timing for getting to school. Plus, we didn't believe that this would solve the overcrowding issues that we're seeing at the high schools already very effectively. Option B, or 2, was the expansion of all the current high schools and a small new high school of about 850 students. On the surface, this seems to solve some of the overcrowding issues we're seeing in our high schools. However, we believe that a small high school would have limited courses available to its students, and we didn't want to limit students on the different courses that they had available to take. Additionally, we believe that in 10 years, we may outgrow that capacity as well and would need to expand that smaller high school. Lastly, option C is the construction of a new high school with a larger capacity of 1,700 students. Up front, this is the most expensive option. However, the costs that we put in now will actually save the district money later, which is one of the things that our middle schoolers mentioned. Additionally, with this option, there will be large boundary changes considering we are adding a large high school into the district. However, we believe that boundary changes are inevitable, so someone's going to have to go through them, unfortunately. So we believe that it would be the best option for right now. And in the end, there was a lot of support for option C, a new high school with a capacity of 1,700 students, because it addressed almost all of our concerns. It will be good for long-term enrollment, solve overcrowding, and offer the same amount of courses as the other high schools. And that was what was the option the most middle schoolers were looking forward to, and the current high schoolers were also in favor of.
Thank you. Board members, do you have any questions for our students? Well, thank you. Let's give our 3 students a round of applause. Thank you so much. And now they can all take a deep breath. Just sit back and enjoy the meeting, right? And hopefully soon you'll get to see your face on the TV. That's a pretty cool thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Next is 5.0, public comment. At this time, individuals may speak to the school board on any item relating to South Washington County Schools. The board will not respond to or discuss your comments. Character abuse or specific complaints identifying staff, students, or task force members will not be permitted. The superintendent may be asked to prepare a response to your concerns. The public comment period will be held open for up to 30 minutes in total. Each speaker is permitted to speak up to 3 minutes in total. The school board will allow up to 3 speakers per topic. At 3 minutes, the microphones will be turned off and we will move on to the next speaker or the next agenda item. The first speaker who Next item, 6.0 is our consent agenda item. All consent agenda items are considered routine and non-controversial by the school board and will be approved by a single motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items. Prior to this meeting, board members have had the opportunity to review each of these items and may request that any item be moved to the action item for individual consideration. Katie? No. Okay. Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda items?
So move.
Who second? Okay. This motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries.
Chair Van Leer, can I interrupt, please? Who made the motion and who made the
I
second?
did.
Thank you. And the second? Thank you.
Okay, Katie?
As a part of the consent agenda, tonight we did approve donations that have been made, cash donations, as well as item donations. For the month of December, we got $45,321.44 donated. And year-to-date for the school year, we have gotten $288,678.61. This list will scroll after the board meeting tonight, so if you see these people out and about in the community, please thank them for donating to our schools.
Thank you, Katie. Next, we have 7.0 information items. 7.1 budget adjustment updates will be presented tonight by Assistant Superintendent Kelly Jensen and Director of Finance Dan Pine.
Right. Good evening, Board Chair Van Leer, board members, student representatives, and Superintendent Nielsen. Tonight, Dan and I are here to provide an update on the budget adjustment process that the board participated in last year. This will include a review of the results to date, an update of some of the year one projects, and a progress report on the implementation of the few of the year two recommendations.
So as a review of the budget adjustment process, you may remember back in October 2020, the board approved the guiding change document for the budget adjustment process. After that, from November through December of 2020, we had many committee meetings to come up with budget adjustment ideas and to vet them out. It included a steering committee, included principals, systems leaders, and district advisory committee inputs from groups such as CFAC and ambassadors. On January 7th of 2021, already over a year ago, we presented the initial recommendations to the school board during a workshop, and there was ample time for discussion and questions. The next week and a half, we had virtual informational meetings for the public. On January 21st of 2021, a year ago tomorrow, the board approved many of the recommendations and didn't approve all of them, but approved many of the recommendations. And right now, we're monitoring these budget adjustments to see which ones could be totally implemented, and also what the dollars look like with the adjustments. You may recall that our goal was to come up with adjustments of totaling $18 million over 3 years. The year one goal was $12 million, combination of revenues and expenses, but mostly expenses. Our year two goal, which is next year, was between $3 million and $6 million, and most of that had to do with the passing of an operating referendum, which was successful, which would bring in $6 million in revenues. And then the year three goal is somewhere between $0 and $4 million. So year one, how did we do? Our update so far in year one, which is the fiscal year I'm in right now, and it was pretty much a tremendous feat to actually reduce by $9 million. So we thought, you know, based on what was approved by the board, that we'd have a total of about $9.1 million in budget adjustments. And as we went through the list, we found that we have actual savings as of the end of last month of about $8.3 million.
I'm sure you noticed that the projected and where we are, there was a difference. And this slide highlights some of the year one bigger projects that contributed to that difference. The first one, the reduction in number of pre-purchased special education pre-K slots, was proposed based on historical use of pre-purchased pre-K slots. And as the enrollments came, this year the need was greater. And so we were using more than those 3 slots, and therefore resulted in the difference between the projected of $450,000 and our actual savings of $207,000. The next item, the task of reassignment of resource professionals, paraprofessionals, did happen. So we did reassign resource paraprofessionals from 1 paraprofessional to every 2 case managers. These are the paraprofessionals that work with the students in the classrooms. However, the district's overall need for paraprofessionals in other areas was greater, which resulted in the difference between the projected savings versus the actual savings. So the budget item of assigning them was done, but we did see needs and increases in paraprofessionals in other areas. The last big project to highlight for year one is the pilot of eliminating a substitute teacher. This was only for the high school. While this is occurring at times, we did find it difficult, as we sat down and talked through this, to quantify how it impacted the budget. Few things played into that. As you know, the subbing situation this year, we are consolidating a lot of different classes. So that played into an impact on the budget, along with increasing our pay to stay with market rate for substitutes. So comparing budgets from one year to the other, found it really difficult to quantify. We are doing this when appropriate, and we will continue to do it when appropriate and keep an eye on that bottom line for substitutes. But to quantify and say it's specifically because of this was not something that we could say that is happening right now. Any questions on those 3 big items?
Yeah. Of course. So I just had a question. So you said that the projected savings, or what we'd anticipated saving was $9.1 million. It's 8.3 is the actual savings through December 2021. Is that projected out through June 2022?
Yes.
Okay.
Projection.
Other year one questions? All right, during the budget adjustment process, we also proposed some projects for year 2, so implementation for next school year, which meant planning needed to happen this year, in particular to stay along our staffing timelines, as you know, start very, very soon. Some of those bigger projects included 2 from our transportation department, and then also a restructure of elementary specialists. And Dan's going to talk about the transportation restructure, and then I'll come back and review the elementary specialist restructure.
In transportation, we have annual costs every year of buying new school buses, and it gets quite high. We end up usually leasing these buses, so part of the budget adjustment process was to forego purchasing new school buses, essentially extending the life of the current ones, another 2 years. School buses do not have to be replaced by any date. The big yellow ones don't. There are smaller vehicles that have expiration dates of 12 years, but they took away the expiration dates, and as long as that they're inspected by the Department of Transport, by the State Highway Patrol actually, and are fit to use, we can use them. So anyway, long story short, we're not buying any new school buses in year 2, and that will happen and we will save $125,000. The other thing from transportation came was restructuring 3 routes, reducing 3 routes through restructuring, saving about $92,000. This has turned out to be difficult to manage this year and look forward, mainly because the shortage of bus drivers, the on and off again routing we're doing with the pandemic, going to distance learning, going back off of it, not us, but we have some of the privates and non-publics that had switched. In all honesty, we feel that we could reduce enough to go to about $30,000 in savings, but short of extending any walking distances, we probably won't get to the 92,000. Any questions on transportation?
So you said that short of extending walking distances, would that be for, like, is that a statement that we should think about in perpetuity, or is that just for the purposes of the next couple of years?
Well, on the finance side, we always consider it. The statute, Minnesota State statute requires to bus any student that lives more than 2 miles away, and that's all grades. Our policy is to bus any elementary student that lives more than 1 mile away, and any middle school student that lives 1.5 miles away. And we're not suggesting that we're going to do that to save this, but those are, I'm saying short of doing that, we probably couldn't get to the 92,000.
And that would be the case, like, that's just going to be the case going forward regardless.
Yeah, if you want to, reduce routes, that's the only surefire way to do it. We are experimenting, maybe with some more station stops, and that would require the students to walk further to the bus station, but having less stops, most on the secondary level. We're not considering that on the elementary or the middle school level. Thank you.
All right. The last bigger ticket item from year 2 that we were working on implementing this year was the elementary specialist restructure. This included taking a look at how we offer art, music, physical education, and media to our elementary students. And so to get, and our goal, as you see there, was $622,000. So throughout the fall and into the winter, Dr. Brookins, our assistant superintendent for elementary level, led a process which included district leaders, elementary principals, and specialist lead teachers to discuss how to implement a restructure and what that could look like for our students without losing service for our students. And based on the work of the team, the total specialist reduction opportunity identified as practical was 6.3 FTE, and that's the change that you see from the $622,000 goal that we have set to the projected impact of that 6.2 reduction at $395,000. So there was quite an extensive process and lots of information that went along with it, but we certainly didn't want to we wanted to make sure our students weren't losing out on any opportunities for those. As you heard, a lot of their favorite subjects come from those areas. So this reduction is happening through other efficiencies and things, but we aren't changing model or delivery for our students as far as how much they're going to get. Any questions on that elementary specialist restructure? All right. So for next steps with any adjustments, for now, the management of any adjustments will come through Dan and his office's timeline for the reporting of the budget. So in the spring, Dan will present to the board his preliminary FY23 budget, which you will view. And then the steering committee will continue to support Dan and his team on the academic side of implementations and projections if there's any further reductions directed by the board or found necessary through Dan's reporting of the budget. I think Julie has said it often that all of our adjustments looked great on paper, and when we sit down and try to do them, we just wanted to have this accountability system where you saw and heard some of the bigger projects that we have been working on and where we landed on them to date. So any questions in general?
Of course. Is this on properly, Pepe? Okay. So it looks like then in year 2, it'll be like 280-ish thousand short of what was anticipated. Is that accurate? Give or take?
Yeah, just on the pure budget adjustments, yes.
Okay, yes, that's what I'm, on the cuts that we made. Would that, do you anticipate those rolling into, are those cuts part of year 3 as well? So will those roll into year 3, and will year 3 as a result also be a little bit short?
Yeah, because the ones that we were talking about were ones that would be sustained. Yeah, it would be.
Okay.
You know, and that's why we set our goal so high at 18 million effect over 3 years, knowing that not everything always works out as you plan. And the budget's pretty fluid, and once you get the update on the revised budget, in March, hopefully March, or at least by April, you'll kind of get an idea where we stand.
Will does the passage of the referendum and the cash of that, because that's what, 13 over 2 years, $13 million over 2 years, does that cover the shortfall that we've gotten from some of our cuts?
It was part of the calculation of the 18
Okay.
million.
Okay.
And I
No,
think
no.
I was just going to add, we want to, we talk about continuous improvement, but we should always be looking at inefficiencies within our system, and it shouldn't take a full-blown budget adjustment process to make shifts and adjustments. And so we continue to look at those things. I think, Kelly said it best, and they've heard me say that 100 times. I have been through budget adjustments with another district at least, including South Washington County, at least 10 times, and they got progressively more painful. And the reality is sometimes you put these items on paper with the intent that they can be implemented, and we really wanted to be transparent. We've heard a lot about transparency and trust around the budget and how we're spending, and we wanted to come back and say, hey, we thought this was the amount we could reduce, and in fact, when we went to implement, that was not the case. And so that is that transparency back to the board as well as to our community when we come up with items.
Okay.
Thank you.
Dan and Kelly. Next, we have 7.2 long-range facility update presented tonight by Christine Schaefer, Assistant Superintendent, and Dan Pine, Director of Finance and Operations.
Good evening, School Board Chair Van Leer, School Board members, Superintendent Nielsen, and student reps. We're here tonight to share information with you related to the long-range facility process. As you remember at our last school board meeting on January 6th, we went through this information with you, and we greatly appreciate your questions, your conversation, and your feedback. That was a great discussion we had. And so tonight, you're gonna see that presentation again, because we would like the community members to also see the presentation, so you'll see it again. Although I think I might have Riya do it because she did such a good job summarizing the whole thing. Nice job. All right, so before we start, I just want to let you know that since the last board meeting when you saw the information, we have also shown this to our Parents Ambassador Group, and that are parents from every school in our district. Today we showed it to our Student Ambassador Group and we got their feedback. And last night we had our second task force meeting. So we have a long-range facilities task force, and that is staff members and parents and community members from throughout the district. And so we've gotten feedback from those 3 groups. And so as we move through this process, we will continue to do that, to get feedback from groups, bring it back to you as we move towards our one final plan. All right? All right, so let's get started. So we added this slide, because as you remember, we want to make sure that everyone knows that this plan will be implemented in 2025. So if there are boundary changes, or if there are school additions or new schools, that will go into effect in 2025. So we have a few years until this all is implemented. And so our 3 main points. So it is projected that within the next 10 years, we will have 8,000 new homes built in our school district, both Cottage Grove and Woodbury. And with that, we anticipate 3,500 new students. Those are the projections. And so along with that, we will have 15 of our schools that will be over capacity within the next 10 years. So we know that we have to do something with our facilities. All right, our purpose. So the goals of this whole program is to ensure adequate classroom space at all grade levels, to ensure that we have space for early learning, special education, alternative high school, and operational facilities, to achieve the best possible learning environment for students, and to design equitable learning spaces at all of our school levels. So those are the goals of the long-range facility process. And so as you remember, we did approve the results and the goals that you approved a few months ago at a board meeting. And so this is that right-hand column of the results that we anticipate and we are working towards through this plan. So we will address the enrollment increases and new construction of homes or changing of boundaries in this plan. We will address the modernization of classroom spaces. We'll address needed renovations such as elementary bathrooms that we've talked about a few times. We'll address curriculum and instructional delivery methods. We know that we'll have transportation facility needs. As our district gets bigger, we'll need more buses. We know that we need more space at the alternative high school. We'll need more space for operational facilities, early learning programming, special ed programming, and then this plan will also talk about how some buildings or schools could be repurposed. And so with all of that, we also need a funding plan. And so this, we will also address a funding plan for the cost of this 10-year facility plan, which you'll see again here in a minute, that will include bonding, lease levies, and long-term facility maintenance revenue. And then overall, we would like to create learning spaces that support college and career readiness for students, environments that inspire social interactions, and diverse instructional styles and accommodate multiple forms of collaboration. So those are our goals throughout this process. And you've seen this a few times, but just as a reminder for the community as well, this is the process that we will go through as we look at long-range facilities. We have a leadership team, which is the 4 of us that you see up here. We have a design team, and that is experts in the field, so architects, construction company, and we hope that in the February board meeting, we invite them all here, and we introduce them to you so they can talk to you about what their role is in this process. We have a steering committee, which is our executive cabinet, that we bring feedback to. We have our task force, who we met with last night. Those are staff and community members. And we will have focus groups in the next couple of months, and we will invite community members to come in and learn more about the plan and give us their feedback. So that is our process. That is just a visual of that process, so you can see the feedback loops that come back to the steering committee, that will go to the superintendent, and then come back to you. All right? We want to ensure that we have lots of voices and input as we go throughout this process. All right, now Pepe Barton will talk about the timeline.
So most of you remember that we have to go back to October 2018 for when the process started. And the school board approved the creation of a long-range facility planning process to identify the enrollment projections, building capacity that's already in our district, the housing developments, and to collect data. And so once that was approved in 2018, that's when we partnered with Davis Demographics at that time for a full demographics report of the district. And so in October 2018, the steering committee was also developed to create a plan to gather input from our stakeholders. And so between October and March 2019, October 2018 to March 2019, that was the point in which that report was being established. And then in March to August of 2019, that steering committee reviewed the content of that plan. In June of 2019, our facility staff went out to our schools and buildings and talked with the principals and department and program leaders to look at what the facility needs were in each of our buildings so that we could help improve student learning. And then in August 2019, that was our first task force of staff and community members, 35 plus, and they went through the different enrollment projections, what we were seeing as enrollment in our district, and the building capacity, the community growth plans, primarily in Woodbury and Cottage Grove, and just looking at construction options. In February of 2020, focus groups were held with our district advisory groups, school staff, and our city decision makers, so the mayors of Cottage Grove, Newport, Woodbury, and our other communities. So all of that work culminated in 2 elementary plans and 2 secondary plans, and those were finalized, ready for the community to review, and we had just scheduled community information sessions for feedback on those plans, and then COVID hit. And so you'll see there that we put everything on hold for a year until this last March in 2021, when we brought back the leadership and steering committees to begin to regroup and review new data and review the previous facility plans. And I think everyone was kind of surprised with the growth in the community continued even during the pandemic. And when we updated you last November, you saw all of those developments across the district. In August of last year, the facility staff went back out to the schools to understand any new needs that maybe we learned during the pandemic and identify any student needs to improve student learning. And the steering and leadership committees reviewed the latest Woodbury and Cottage Grove building data, which amazingly continue to grow. Last November, the long-range facility team updated the school board with all of that data around the housing developments in our communities, and we brought back the original task force members. And so we revisited our previous plans, kind of what we were looking forward to, and you'll see some working options that our design team, leadership team, and task force are working on tonight. In December, the design team and leadership committee revised those previous plans to accommodate our ongoing growth in the community and the new facility needs. And there are also initial discussions about a bond referendum election for August of 2022, pending board approval, and that would be required to raise enough funds for our plans. Now in January, where we are now, we have new plans and working options that we'll go through tonight, and new enrollment data and the timelines shared with the board. We, as Christine mentioned, we shared with the task force yesterday, and we're gathering feedback. In February, we'll have another update to share with the board on our working options. And then in March, that's when we really plan to narrow our working options down to one preferred plan, and we'll share with the school board and community. And we'll do that through community information sessions to gather feedback on that one preferred plan. Now in April, that will be the final approval that will request the board to approve the final long-range facility plan, as well as request approval to ask voters to consider construction funding through a bond referendum. In June of 2022, we'll share more information about the election itself, and then August 9th, 2022 would be the special election that would occur. And then you see fall 2025, as Christine mentioned, that's the earliest time that families would notice big changes in the district between opening of renovated buildings or new construction. Well, construction will be going on, but and potential boundary changes. And so what we know with the growth in our district is that construction alone won't necessarily solve the issue, so that's why you'll see in the working options tonight, there are different elements and either extensive or minimal boundary changes in the plans. And one thing to note is that when we do share the preferred plan, that would include what would happen to any buildings, any potential boundary changes at that time. And so it will be all in one package so that the community and board can respond to that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dan Pyan, Director of Finance.
So the next two people to hear from were both Dan, and our names sound, if you say them real fast, about the same, but I'm Dan Pyan, and he's Dan Hines. Just want to review real quickly, what happened after COVID. COVID's not over, but the process post-COVID. We got really far on the last one, and then we had to put it on hold. So we immediately went back to work, and we reviewed the pre-COVID plans through the community task force, the steering committee leadership team, and the design team. And we made adjustments to align with new data. And how did we collect that data? Well, the facility teams, mainly Dan Hines, went out and talked to the principals and department leaders again to see if there were new things that were needed since the last time we looked at it. We looked at new enrollment projections. And those were based on new housing developments. So we collected information from the cities on what new housing developments had happened since the last time we looked, and then we put them into our new enrollment projections. And then we also looked at all our building capacities again to make sure that we had the right building capacity calculations. With that, we created 3 new plans. We're currently gathering the costs and the needs for each plan. And we're gathering feedback from the board, task force, advisory teams, community. I'll just talk a little bit about the enrollment so that we understand what we're looking at. As we said before, over the next 10 years, more than 3,500 new students will enter our district. And if we do nothing, our current projections show that we'll have a deficit of nearly 2,500 K-12 seats for students by 2031. This is a visual. You can see what's happening for the next 10 years. We're seeing a steady growth, but it does turn out to be over 350 students per year. We like to show this graphic because it really points out, and you have to remember, we have 24 school buildings. So we can't possibly put them all on one slide, but as we look at each building, as you look at this graphic, you want to look on the far right, which is the current building capacity of that school. And the far left, the dark one, is the current enrollment. The middle one, the red one, is projected enrollment in the next 10 years. This slide includes Bailey, Gray Cloud, and Liberty Ridge. You can see those are going well above projections. Cottage Grove Elementary is going to go over a little bit. The other ones are holding tight. On this one, you can see that Pine Hill is going to be a tough spot. Red Rock is going to push it. New Avis, we can control that enrollment, but that one's going to run at rate of capacity, which is what we want. As we look at the middle schools, you can see that they're all going to be over capacity. Oldman Middle School is probably the largest one over capacity. And when we built Oldman Middle School, we knew that we would have to increase it, and it was designed to have additions put onto it. But we're going to see pressure at Lake Middle School too, and Cottage Grove Middle, and a little bit at Woodbury. And high school-wise, you can see right there from the graphic that East Ridge is already over capacity, capacity of 1,712. Right now, we have 1,984 students in there, projecting to be 2,570. Park High School is holding on right now, but it projects to go to 2,257. And right now, Woodbury is over capacity right now with 1956 as opposed to a capacity of 1925. So in summary, and this side is a cumulative slide. Right now, over capacity, we have 2 high schools over capacity, East Ridge and Woodbury. Within 2 years, we'll have 2 elementaries and a middle school over capacity, Gray Cloud Elementary and Pine Hill Elementary, and then Oldman Middle School will go over capacity. And then within 10 years, we will have 10 more schools go over capacity, Bailey Elementary, Cottage Grove Elementary, Cottage Grove Middle, Lake Middle School, Liberty Ridge Elementary, Park High School, Pullman Elementary, Red Rock, the Alt High School, and Woodbury Middle School. So within 10 years, we'll have 15 school buildings over capacity. With that, I'll turn it over to Dan Hines, who will go over the working options.
So I doubt I can deliver this as clear and concise as our student ambassadors, but I'll give it a whirl. I think somebody's vying for my job. So as we look out into our working options, we're being very deliberate about calling them working options. So we're taking all of the feedback from the different interested parties along this journey, put it in a blender, and come up with one final plan. And then that final plan will be delivered to the board for approval. And so keep in mind as we go through this, components of each one of these working options could end up in the final option. So with working option A, the intent here is to construct additions at the schools that need them. A portion of this is boundary changes as well, because some schools are limited in the ability to build additions on them. But then also in addition to additions would be renovating bathrooms, kitchens, early learning space, and special education spaces as we move forward. So modernizing a lot of those spaces for instruction today. It's also going into our schools that do not currently have collaborative learning areas, so areas where multiple classes of kids can spill into one area and learn at the same time. So this would be creating those spaces at the schools that currently lack them. And then lastly, a big piece of this would be constructing a new elementary school in the central portion of the district. So as Woodbury and Cottage Grove grow together, there really aren't any schools sort of in that central space between the two, so it would be dropping a school in between the two as they grow together. Our middle school options, these are consistent across all three of the plans you'll see. This is simply adding additions on all four middle schools, taking each one of them to 1,400 students, as well as expanding the kitchens and cafeterias to accommodate those students. So mainly we're talking about Oltman and Woodbury Middle School as far as the kitchens and cafeterias are concerned. With the high schools. So the essence of this high school plan would be taking the 3 high schools that we have, expanding them to 2,400 students with a design for a potential to go to 2,700 students at some point in time in the future if needed. So the first piece to this at all 3 schools would be expanding the cafeterias and kitchens. Specifically at Park and Woodbury, it would be constructing brand new kitchens and cafeterias on the site. This would be creating a multi-purpose space within the school where students that are taking supplemental coursework online can go during the day to do that. And it would also be going into our career and technical education spaces as well as our STEM spaces and really modernizing those facilities for instruction today. And central, as everybody knows, with Park and Woodbury in particular, a big piece of this is redesigning the site as a whole. So this would be increasing parking, this would be changing traffic patterns, increasing pedestrian safety, and rethinking the sites from scratch to really make them work at that sort of size. And in addition to that would be moving our alternative high school, which currently is at our district program center. It shares multiple other programs within that one building. This would be moving that alternative high school into an existing space in the district where it would be its own standalone program, growing to 300 students. Currently it's about 120. Support sites. So as we grow with students, we need to grow with student support. We have to get kids to school and get them back home again, so transportation will grow. As transportation grows, we're going to need more busing. Currently, our transportation site was built in 1970-ish, don't hold me to that date, and it is full. Quite literally could not park another bus at the current transportation site if we tried. And so this would be taking transportation, constructing a new site, more central in the district, and allowing it to expand its footprint. We would then sell the current transportation site and get the deferred maintenance that's currently down there off the books. Also, with student support services, currently now those services are spread throughout the district. This building, DSC being one of them, but District Program Center is another, as well as out in our school sites. This would construct a brand new centralized district service center where all of the support staff could be located in one location. Then the current district support sites, about $25 million in LTFM, or deferred maintenance, if you will. That deferred maintenance would fall off of our 10-year plan. And then these sites would all be sold as well. So big considerations on this one. Our elementary capacity is bang on for about 10 years of our projected growth. Middle school capacity, the same, about 1,000 more students than we have today at the middle school level. High school capacity, slightly more than 10 years. We're looking at about a 12-year projection at the high school, and we're taking that up to about 7,200. Again, that's 2,400 students each at our high schools. Alternative high school goes to about 300 students from 120. Now, a big component of this is looking at adding onto schools versus building new. We talk about a more scaled back approach to boundaries. So minimal boundary changes at the elementary and high school level, and no boundary changes at the middle school level to existing students. So working option B. At the elementary level, this is very similar. One of the big differences here that we're talking about is the philosophy of what the elementary schools look like. And so anyone that's familiar with Liberty Ridge Elementary School, currently there's an annex site directly adjacent to it, across the street in this case, where our early learning, pre-K, early childhood special education, and kindergarten is located at a separate site than the main building. There's a small scaled down cafeteria, a small scaled down gym, and it functions as its own standalone site. What that allows us to do is take an elementary school above 1,000 students, while the main building itself doesn't feel oppressively large. And so this plan essentially has all of the components of Plan A at the elementary levels, but these additions look different. So these additions look like small satellite schools on the same property as the existing schools, and this would occur between 2 and 4 sites based on projections. So it's a philosophy question. All of the other components, the renovation of bathrooms, early learning, special education, as well as that new central elementary school, are still a component of this plan at the elementary level. At the middle school level, again, exactly the same as Plan A, so additions to take each one to 1,400. At the high school level, things change a little bit. So we still talk about constructing the additions at all 3 high schools. In lieu of the 2,400 expansion with the future expansion to 27, in this plan, we talk about taking them to 2,200. And so at 2,200, the core spaces that are built here, and when we say core spaces, we're talking parking lots and cafeterias, locker rooms, these would only be expanded to that 2,200 capacity. So we would be maxed out at 22 at these sites with this option. The second piece of this at the high school level would be constructing a new 4th high school of a scaled down size, so roughly 850 students. The core spaces at this 4th high school would be built as such that we could then take it in the future to 1,700, which is what Eastridge is at. So it would be basically future-proofing, but only building the academic classrooms today for the next 10 years. As far as support sites, the district service center, which is our support services, remains the same in this plan. Transportation also remains the same in this plan. The difference in this is where things are located. So by building that 4th high school, we can create a more campus environment. So alternative high school would likely be located on the site, whether it's a wing of the new high school or its own standalone building, as well as our transitions program. So Next Step and Pathways, our post-high school programs. And then a SoWashCo Online Centers for our new SoWashCo Online program. This would house the staff for that program. So considerations in this one. By far and away, this is the highest elementary school capacity. So it's roughly 600 students more than it would be in option A. Middle school, again, is exactly the same, and our high school capacity in this plan is roughly the same. The difference is how the schools grow and what they grow to. Alternative high school is slightly scaled back. This scales it back to about 200 students versus 300. And this has the most minimal boundary adjustments, and that's pretty much across all levels. So in working option C, this is sort of a thematic plan, if you will. And what I mean by that is this creates a feeder system. So in the feeder system, there would be a direct cohort of elementary schools that feed a middle school, and then each middle school would directly feed a high school. And so you could take your boundary maps, lay them over the top of each other, and you'd know exactly what schools are in each one of those clusters. So it would keep those cohorts of kids together from pre-K all the way through their senior year of high school. We would still go into our elementary schools that are existing, add those additions that are needed for the adjusted boundaries in this case. We would still renovate bathrooms, kitchens, early learning, and special education space, and we would still need to construct that new central elementary school. A big difference here is we would take one of our existing elementary schools and we would convert it to be strictly early learning only. So that site would house and cluster all of our early learning, and so when I'm talking early learning, I'm not just talking about the 4-year-olds that we see in our pre-K programs, but I'm also talking about our 3-year-olds as well as our special education services for early childhood. Again, middle school option, exactly the same, expanding all of our existing middle schools to 1,400. At the high school level, this is where things shake up a little different. So we would still go in to our existing high schools and renovate, but on a scaled back sort of way, our existing kitchens, cafeterias, and our core spaces that are in need. We would still renovate and modernize our career and technical education programs, as well as our STEM programs. But the big sort of bread and butter of this plan is the construction of a new traditional fourth high school. So this is an Eastridge-size 1,700 high school. And so this would be somewhere likely further east of where our current schools are, because that's the direction we're pushing for the most part. We go the other way, we hit the river eventually. Our support sites, as they were in working option B, are the same in working option C, so that centralized transportation center, as well as all of the services that would be on that campus, so alternative high school, transition program, and potentially our district service center. But the big considerations in this one is the price tag. Obviously, this is the most expensive plan. Our capacities are roughly still on par with where our capacities were in working option A. The feeder system, again, that's a big piece of this plan, is creating that feeder system, that direct cohort of students throughout the grades. But this by far and away would have wide sweeping and extensive boundary changes at all levels. So in order to create not only nominally sized schools, but to create that feeder system itself and really make a school work, boundary changes would be extensive. And so at the high school level, if we build a 1,700 student high school, you have to move at least that many students in order to fill it up. So boundary changes would be central to this. So as we look at the totals, again, working option A, roughly $425 million, additions only. High schools go to 2,400 with the future expansion to go to 27. Working option B, current high schools go to 2,200 with a new, smaller fourth high school built with the ability to scale up to 1,700. That's $500 million. And working option C creates that feeder system. All of the high schools stay exactly the size they are today with the construction of a new fourth at 1,700, and that's a $580 million plan. I think Mr. Pyan's coming back up.
So of course you're going to wonder how we're going to pay for all this. First thing you want to remember though is that construction funding does not take away any money from education funding. We've passed referendums up to the cap with the great support of our taxpayers and our citizens. And those dollars that were for operating levy, those all go to operations to pay salaries, mainly for teaching staff and support staff. So what we have to do is sell bonds. This is the only way that a school district can raise enough money to construct school buildings. And what's a bond referendum? Well, that gives voters the opportunity to decide if we should be authorized to raise construction funding through the sale of bonds. We can have bond referendums on 5 specified dates a year. The bonds are much like a mortgage. They allow the district to borrow money, and then we pay it back over time. Depending on the size of the bonds, some of the payback times range between 18 years and 25 years. And like I said, this is the only method that we can use to raise enough funds for new construction. Next steps, Christine?
All right. So our next steps are going to be to take all the feedback that we got from you and our other our task force and our student groups and our other parent groups and look at that. We will work with our steering committee to narrow it down to one plan, and then we'll continue to gather community feedback and again to present that one plan to you in April. Right? But along the way before April, we will come to each board meeting with updates as to where we are at in the process so that you can ask questions and give us feedback. Any questions?
I had one actually, and I was hoping Riya could speak to this. When you guys had your conversation today, did you talk about, because you mentioned that your group really liked Plan C. Did you guys talk about the feeder system at all or have any thoughts about how that would work?
We didn't focus too much on it. I think we did talk about the boundary changes a lot, and if we could avoid that at all. However, we realized it's inevitable. to avoid boundary changes or a feeder system, because it has to happen eventually. And if not now, it's going to happen later on. And as long as we can all have access to that same level of education, that was the most important thing to our group today.
I have a question. So with the 3 different plans, you talked about that they would be implemented in 2025. Now, are any of these plans, I'm thinking more of like Plan C, going to take longer to be able to actually have, you know, them built to the point where the students would be able to be going there? And if so, would we need to be able to start sooner, or are we pushing the date even further up?
That's a good question. Dan, do you want to talk about how long it takes to build a high school?
So each one of the different components of it take a different amount of time to construct, right? So a simple addition might be something we can literally do over a summer. When we build an elementary school, with lead times where they're at, it's minimum of 3 years. And that's from the time that the voters approve the bond to the time that it's designed and then constructed and open. A high school can be in excess of 4 years. And a big piece of that is just getting utilities to the site to even begin construction, because typically a high school is built somewhere where there isn't already things, because it's at least 100 acres to build a high school, which doesn't just exist within communities right now. So it's so diverse with the materials and the shortages that are existing right now. I would say it's at least 4 years from that August 9th date to see an elementary, and at least 4 years from that August 9th date to see a high school.
So how soon would we have to secure potential land space for building a new high school?
I think we'll rely pretty heavily on our cities to help guide us into where we can actually put the schools that we're proposing constructing. We can't buy anything without voter approval as far as bonds are concerned, so we're sort of hinged on that, on a successful bond referendum.
One other question, Dan, is you had mentioned in Plan A, the plan would be to build to 2,400 and then go to 2,700. So that 2,700 would be past 12 years from now.
Correct, yeah.
Correct?
Yep.
But then doing like, I could have done my math wrong, but would there be a need, I mean, at that point, would we also be thinking about having to add to our middle schools again, or, because it looks like we're getting to like, because we currently have roughly across, like in any given grade, like 1,400 kids, right? And we look like we're getting to like 1,800 kids per grade as part of this. And the middle schools won't have the space, for at least right now, that won't have the space to accommodate that growth. So, but that's something that also could be, that's a 10-year thing, or is that something we should be thinking about as part of this too?
It's a great question, because it sort of goes back to the same kind of philosophy around the size of the high schools. Is that same question comes up with what's the ideal size of a middle school, or what's the maximum size of a middle school? And so I'm sure in 10 years' time we'll be having this exact same conversation, but instead of about high schools, we'll be talking about middle schools. And so, you know, you can look at that 2 ways. One way is if you build the feeder system now with 4 middle schools feeding 4 high schools, and in 10 to 12 years, the middle schools are full again. If the decision is made that 1,400 is the largest that middle schools need to be, now we're building a 5th. And so you have that sort of, you're breaking the feeder system there in that sort of way. But also the same thing can be said the other way around. If we build the 3 high schools now, and we get to that 10 to 12, or we keep the 3 high schools that we have now, we don't build one, and we get to that 10 to 12 years. At that point, now you have that decision too. Okay, do we try to build the feeder system now by putting a 4th high school up, or do we take them to 27 and just keep what we have? So it comes back to the philosophy of the size of schools again, really.
And just to say out loud, those sites, because I've seen where Woodbury High School is in particular, can grow to accommodate 2,700 students.
We believe we have a plan that can, but again, it is quite literally, and I can't overstate this enough, rethinking how those sites operate. And it's taking down portions of the building, kind of like we did with the old Oltman when we renovated it into Nuevas Fronteras. Some portions of buildings that were built in 1960 and 1970 don't work in 2020, and they really won't work in 2040. And so, you know, just like you don't buy a car with the anticipation you're going to drive it for 40 years, buildings last a lot longer, but they also don't last forever in a function of a school. And so there's components that either have to be rethought or modernized to do that. So you have to take existing space and rethink what you do with it, basically.
Are there any other board members that have comments? Eric? Louise?
In regards to the remodeling of a high school like Woodbury, since it's somewhat older, where did the estimates as far as what that cost would be, where did those come from?
So we work with our construction manager, Kraus Anderson, and they put all those costs together. So they take concepts that our architects vet, they look at those concepts and they go, okay, A, is it even feasible? What would the phasing look like? How long would it take? And then what would it cost and what would be the inflationary rate on that based on that phasing plan?
Okay. Did they give you a range of, like, it could be from this to this?
They typically just tell us the high end of the range.
The high end?
Exactly, yep.
Okay. I just know from personal experience that when you start to demo stuff, you find a lot of problems. So, that's all, thanks.
Please? Okay. Kitty? Okay, thank you, and we look forward to additional presentations. And at this time, we'll let our students go. Again, thank you for sharing tonight. And we appreciate the opportunity to hear from you, and we look forward to hearing from you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Reese, by number for Riya. Thank you.
Okay, moving along. We are at 8.0 action items. 8.1 is the acceptance of the audit report, and that will be presented tonight by Dan Pine, Director of Finance and Operations.
Good evening, Chair Van Leer, members of the school board, Superintendent Nielsen. So now that stuff was pretty boring. This is the exciting stuff. Well, actually, every year we have an audit done by an independent auditor. And tonight, Aaron Nielsen of MMKR will be presenting the results of the audit. He will mention that once again received an unmodified or clean opinion. The full sets of the financial statements are attached to the board agenda electronically, and they'll be available on the finance section of the district website. We will again apply for the Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting given by the Association of School Business Officials International. We have received that award 15 years in a row and expect to receive it again. And many of the thanks go to Chris Blackburn, our Fiscal Services Director, for the countless hours she put into in preparing the documents needed to be audited, and the rest of the finance staff, which included Manuela Brown, Nikki Castle, Diana Moreno, Patty Marks, and Amy Tarman. With that, I will turn it over to Aaron to present the results of the audit.
Well, good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening. As Dan mentioned, I'm here to present the results of the audit, and my name is Aaron Nielsen. I'm with the independent accounting firm or CPA firm of MMKR, and we're pleased to present the results of your audit for this past year ended June 30th, 2021. As Dan mentioned, you should have 3 reports. Mine are all bound together, so I just had the one document here, but 3 separate reports for your financial statement, the special purpose report, and the management report. So I prepared the PowerPoint with some of the slides from our management report, so just some of the board members are aware. I'm not trying to throw more information at you in addition to all the other documents, but I'll go through that for my presentation. I'm struggling with the change to adapt up and down with these, so I'll do my best to stay in touch with that and keep us on point with the presentation here. So we start with our role as independent auditors to provide that opinion on your financial statement prepared by the district, whether the district's financial statements are fairly stated. You also receive well in excess of the requirements for the single audit, that separate federal audit. This past year, you received in excess of $17 million on the schedule of federal awards, so you've got the separate requirements for that. We also have the required reports for internal controls and compliance for the financial statement audit, the federal single audit, and then the uniform financial, or the state auditor's legal compliance manual for state laws and regulations. So getting right to it, as Dan mentioned, we have issued what is known as an unmodified or clean opinion on that annual financial report. So exactly what you're looking for with regard to our opinion of your financial statements, that they're fairly stated as of June 30th, 2021, and for the year then ended. With regard to the internal control and compliance of the financial report, we're pleased to issue that we note that we had no material weaknesses or instances of non-compliance that we would be required to report to you for this year. With regard to the single audit testing, that separate testing that's required, we have issued a clean opinion on the CFA, or the Schedule of Expenditures of Federal Awards, and we had no material weaknesses or instances of non-compliance to report for the current year for that audit as well. With regard to the Minnesota legal compliance, there's 7 broad categories and several tests within each one of them that we're required to test. And we have just the one comment that we have reported this year with one instance of non-compliance with regard to our testing on withholding affidavits. So certain contracts require that you verify the withholdings by contractors is completed prior to making that final payment. And we had just one instance where that was not completed prior to the payment. Now, with our testing, we know the district did then follow up and ensure there wasn't non-compliance there, and that was completed without an exception, but noting that it needed to be completed prior to that final payment. Right. So we're showing the adjusted ADM, or the average daily membership for this past year. That was included with the audit. For the current year, we reported that the district served 18,497 students, or that adjusted average daily membership, which is a decrease of about 257, or 1.4%. So, which has been unusual for your district. If you probably saw in the management report, generally showing an increase, but that impact that we're seeing with your district and others, with COVID and the pandemic, of the decrease in your enrollment this past year. My next several slides focus on the general fund, or the primary operating fund for the district. The general fund this past year, we show a 10-year history with the cash and investments, unrestricted fund balance, and then the expenditures at that point in time as of year end for each of the past 10 years. Just a reminder, the early years there were some changes in how metering of state aid payments was flowed to school districts, so it did have an impact on cash and investments, but not an impact on fund balance. So it was a way to help balance the state's budget without as quite of an impact on school district budgets. My next slide that I've included here digs a little deeper into the components of your general fund balance, showing the breakdown of the equity of the general fund alone for non-spendable, which includes prepaids and inventory items. Restricted fund balance includes restricted dollars received by the district for operating capital, long-term facilities, and many other state funding mandates. And then everything else falls within a category of the unrestricted, committed, assigned, or unassigned fund balance. Your district has typically only assigned fund balance as required when you've adopted a budget where you're anticipating deficit spending the following year. So you can see that shifted from 2020 to 2019. So overall, bottom line, the total fund balance did increase slightly, about $1.8 million that you can see at that total fund balance level, and that unrestricted fund balance staying similar to the prior year. And I did want to point out our fund balance calculations are a little different than the fund balance policy of the district. So we're looking at that fund balance as a percentage of total expenditures, and your district is looking at it as a percentage of the applicable expenditures without restricted expenses within the general fund. So your current policy is at 5 to 9%, and you are landing within that at 6.3% that we show in a separate table within the management report. Looking at the general fund revenues for this past year, and just for a size of the operation as a large school district within our state, 2021 revenues for the general fund amounted to $263.7 million, and ending the year slightly over budget or within 0.3%, so very close to what was anticipated in that budget, and about 5.3% over the prior year. So some of the funding improvements increased the general fund revenues this past year, but the largest increase you probably noticed was in the federal dollars with some of the pandemic-related funding the district was able to recognize this past year. Another area I commonly point to, you can see your reliance on the state for your funding increases, as your revenue largely comes from state sources, making up 71%. Also by way of local property taxes, which in part is for referendums that are passed, but also by legislative funding formulas, followed up with 24% of the sources within the general fund for property taxes. I've got a similar graph on your general fund expenses this past year. So expenditures totaled $264.1 million. And as I like to believe, operating within your appropriations, your actual expenditures came within 1.5% of budget or under what was approved by the school board, representing an increase of about 5.7% over the prior year. And again, I know I've commented in the past the breakdown of your spending. As you can see, salaries and benefits make up a majority of the spending within the general fund to educate students of the district, and what we see at all the districts that we work with making up, for your case, 79% of general fund spending. And I was comparing my presentation to the prior year, and we tend to follow some of the same graphs, and that breakdown of spending between categories was almost identical to the prior year. So just a little shift, maybe a percentage up or down between a category. Moving on to the other operating funds, we look at the Food Service Special Revenue Fund and the Community Service Special Revenue Fund. And like everything in our lives right now, these funds also were impacted dramatically by the COVID-19 pandemic. And as a reminder, I'm looking back at the 2021 school year, and we had a partial year the year before that we're comparing to that started in March of 20, so just that last quarter of the year. When I'm looking at your prior year to 2 prior years and even prior to that for you where you're operating currently right now. But the Food Service Special Revenue Fund ended with a fund balance of about 18% of their spending. As a percent that has increased, as you can see, the total fund balance increased, but the overall volume of activity has decreased with the change in impact of the pandemic. Also impacted is where those sources are coming from, with more coming from federal dollars financing the lunches this past year. The Community Service Special Revenue Fund, you can see, has experienced a decrease in their fund balance now at $160,000 as of the year ended June 30th, 21, representing about 1.5% of their annual expenditures. Within that category, there are also some components of the fund balance in the Community Service Special Revenue Fund where are there deficits, and something to be aware of and make sure we're managing that moving forward for the district. We have just a couple more slides here. So the internal service funds, the district utilizes a couple internal service funds for certain severance and pension benefits provided to district employees. So we show a 3-year change in the equity position or the income statement and that year-end net position. So this doesn't equal the actual cash balance in the fund. So the cash balance at year-end was about $3.9 million, and it almost matched the amount of obligations, leaving that net amount of 151 in net position at year-end. And then I save everybody's favorite slide for the last one, the district-wide. So at this point, I believe we've been talking on the individual funds, or I know we've been talking about the individual funds, but what I believe how my districts operate that I work with, looking at the individual operations of each individual fund and how the budgets are adopted and managed. With the current financial reporting model, we also have to consolidate the operations of each of the individual funds and combine them, and then also take a long-term perspective. So the general fund that we talked about, the food service, community service funds, they don't include on their balance sheets long-term infrastructure assets like the buildings or long-term pension obligations. So this is our opportunity in that presentation where we consolidate the governmental funds, which is the top line. So you can see a decrease in governmental fund balances about $5.1 million or $5.2 million. And that's largely due to the spending in the capital projects or your construction fund this past year that went into your infrastructure assets. So what we're doing on the top half is showing some of the changes when we talk about the individual governmental funds and then getting you to that entity-wide presentation. So on a long-term perspective, consolidating all of the district funds, you can see an increase of about $4.7 million. However, a lot of that is tied up, and all of it, actually, you can see an increase within that net investment in capital assets. So $14.6 million increase in that category, which is telling me you're paying your bonds off and the obligations of the buildings at a faster pace, or at a faster pace than the buildings are being depreciated. You're also making additions to those buildings without related debt. That increases that category. The decrease you're seeing in the unrestricted fund balance kind of contradicts what we've talked about to this point with the increase in the general fund, and that is largely due to the changes in the PERA and the TRA statewide pension obligations. So your proportionate share that we've talked about for several years now of the requirement that you have to include the proportionate share for your district employees on your financial statements. Those obligations are audited in separate individual audits of each plan, and their assets are set aside separately, and you are meeting the requirements of the annual payments for those plans. So at that point, at this point, I've gotten through my slide presentation. If there's any comments or questions on any of the information I presented, or maybe in the larger document, you do have a large comprehensive financial report with a lot of information that hopefully will be useful for taxpayers of the district as well.
So moved. Second.
Seconded by Pat. All those in favor?
Now we have
Comments, not, okay.
Just one comment. I like the way you explained it. It was very clear and precise, and I could understand it all. Probably so many times going through this that after year. But very nice job.
Thank you very much.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? And that motion's carried. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and it's probably the first time Aaron's ever heard that people actually understood what he said.
Took me 5 years, right?
Okay.
More like 20.
8.2, approval of proposed policy changes, and that will be presented by our superintendent, Julie Nielsen.
Thank you. The following policies in the 100 series: 101, our legal status of the school district; 101.1, the name of our school district; 102, equal education opportunity; 103, complaints; 104, school district mission and mission statement. Those policies came to the board during our workshop meeting, and at that time, we also had the opportunity for public comment. And so tonight, I am seeking approval of the 5 board policies presented to you.
Okay. Can I have a motion to approve policy changes?
So moved.
Okay, it has been moved by Eric and seconded by Katie. Is there any discussion on the comment? Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carried. 8.3 is approval of proposed 2022-23 calendar, and that also will be presented by our superintendent, Julie Nielsen.
Thank you. As I shared last time, all schools must end the school year by June 30th. I like to make sure that we know that there are certain parameters that our calendar committee works under. We are required to have 165 days of instruction regardless for grades 1 through 11. Our current teacher contract requires 183 duty days. And just to make the board aware and our viewing public, we are going back to approving just a year at a time. And so typically at this point in the year, we will always approve for the following year. We were at a point in time where things maybe were calmer, and we thought we could do the 2-year, but I think we found that we were making a lot of adjustments throughout. And so we're going to give this a try to bring it back. So I think just for our community to know that they can expect this to be approved typically at the second meeting in January. And so by February 1st, the calendar will be set. Tonight, in looking at our calendar, after feedback from board members during our workshop meeting, and we had a really good conversation and got varying perspectives from board members, you will notice the removal of, I believe it was 5 total flex days, but there still remains 3 flex days on there. October 19th is a day set aside for 9 through 12. We've had some questions about the pre-ACT and the practice for 10th and 11th graders. It's important to note that when we have testing at our high schools, it requires smaller class sizes, additional proctors, and so we actually are pulling teachers and spreading students out so they can actually test. So that is for October 19th. November 8th, we currently have an election day, and typically our schools have been closed, and we are going to do that day, or recommend that day, as a flex learning day. In thinking about that day, I hope that in the future that that day becomes a nice day for students to practice and be reminded of what it's like to connect virtually. In the event of snow or a day or days when you might have to be off 2 or 3 days, we want students to continue to have those skills. And so November 8th is our only K-12 day, and so that is our only day that will be a K-12 virtual day. February 7th on this calendar is our South Suburban Music Festival, and typically when a high school hosts that, it really just shuts the whole high school down. And because we know we would have approximately 800 students moving back and forth, we are going to recommend that that continue to be a flex learning day for our high school students. And then finally, what you don't see on this particular calendar, right now it's listed in purple in April, and it says the ACT testing date. That date has not been determined yet, but that would actually turn into a green day so that when we are hosting ACT testing and the need to proctor at our high schools, we would continue to do that, and other students would be learning from home. The days that we talk about on this calendar have typically been days when students have learned from home, and so that really is not new. And then finally, one last adjustment. In previous calendars, our elementary students have gotten out of school 2 days early because our elementary teachers are putting in 2 days earlier for assessments. And so I'm going to recommend on this calendar where you see November 7th, these numbers are really hard to read, and I just got new glasses, November 7th, I believe it is, and November 7th and May 12th, those would turn into student contact days. So those would become yellow, so all students would be in school. So right now we have our 612 students in school. Those days would turn into student contact days, and that would mean at the end of the year, our elementary students would finish on a Friday, June 2nd would be their last day, and then our staff would return for the 2 days. With that, are there any further questions? I hope that reflects the board's thinking from workshop and the adjustments that were made.
I do have one question for you.
Sure.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. I was a little slow walking forward. Okay, and I gotta do this. Can I have a motion to approve the 22-23 calendar?
So moved.
Who moved?
Luis?
And who's second? Simi? Melinda?
Are you moving with the calendar as it is written, or the calendar
As described, as described by our superintendent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is there any discussion now there?
Yeah, I had a question, and we had a discussion today, so you clarified a number of things for me, which I appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
In regards to, for example, elections or any other type of event that might take up the use of a school.
Yep.
What was done in the past,
Mm-hmm.
because we didn't have virtual learning,
Right.
Obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Were those days typically added on to the end of the school year?
Yeah, in the previous years, those days were professional development days. I'm kind of looking out, but those were days that teachers reported and not students. And
Okay.
so, yes, that is correct.
And
And so we're utilizing that day right now as an opportunity. I think even as the weather gets bad, our elementary kids in particular don't take their devices home all the time. So it's really going to be that opportunity for them to have a day of learning where they're connecting with their teachers virtually.
I'm assuming that they still need to have, you know, the requirement of 165, you know, working school days for the students.
Yeah, instructional days, yes.
I mean, they've always had that.
Yes.
Or they've always had some requirement.
Right.
So even though the teachers are still working, you know, on an election day or whatever in the school, what happens to the day for the students?
Yep, the day for the students on that particular day in the past, it was a no-school day for students.
Okay, so the day was, they had to put it somewhere.
Yeah, we had to put it somewhere.
Had to put it,
Yep.
I mean, it had to be put somewhere,
Right.
okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Exactly.
Is this the comment section? That was a question. You know, and thank you. While I appreciate, you know, the time that it took to put the calendar together, I know there was, you know, a lot of work involved and a good discussion was had. I just remain unconvinced that there's a demonstrative value to virtual learning over in-person learning. And I know that we've been able to, or you've been able to take the days, the flex days down from 8 to 3, potentially 4. However, I believe that we should have every day of the 165 with the kids in school. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
So can I ask a sort of a follow-up or clarify? Sorry, can I ask a clarifying question on what Eric asked? So for days in the past when kids are taking the ACT or whatever and they've been given work to complete from home. But if we were to say, to Eric's point, would have 165 days in person, and so the juniors are taking the ACT, 9th, 10th, and 12th graders don't have school. So would we have to add an extra day of school for just 9th, 10th, and 12th graders, or because the juniors would have taking the ACT is considered an instructional day?
Correct. What we would have to do is go back and calculate minutes for all the grade levels, because if you're reminded, there are certain minutes that grade levels have to meet. And with this calendar, we are right at the minimum minutes for our students. Yep.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
Motion carried. Our next item is 8.4, approval of board member employment, and that will be presented by Julie Nielsen.
Thank you again. This evening, pursuant to 123B.195, school board members are allowed to be employees of the district provided they receive majority approval from the board to continue in employment with the district. There is, however, a limit of $8,000 of employment income from South Washington County Schools. This evening, I am seeking approval for Louise Hines to be employed as a substitute teacher for South Washington County Schools.
Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the employment status of Louise?
So move.
Second. Okay, who did that?
I moved it.
Pat, okay. And seconded by Eric. Okay, is there any discussion or comments?
I just have one question. Is this a calendar year, January to December, or is this a calendar year, September, or school year? The $8,000? Just because that'll matter if you do it again next year.
I would have to be approved again next year, correct?
Correct.
We'll confirm, but I believe, Dan and I believe it's a calendar year.
So this would give her until the end of December. We wouldn't
Correct.
have to vote on it again if she wants to do it in September, is what
Correct.
I'm.
It would be a tax filing year, not a fiscal year for the
Okay.
district.
Okay. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried.
Abstain. I'm going to abstain.
Okay, Louise, you have to abstain.
Yes.
Okay. Louise, I wonder why. All right. Next is 9.0, our superintendent's report. Julie?
Thank you. I don't know about all of you, but it is so hot up here tonight. Thank you. I'm glad everyone's agreeing. And my head is throbbing because it's so hot. I feel like I'm getting a workout that I didn't get this morning, but I'm going to make this quick. Our district dashboard has been updated. What you'll see on that dashboard is we are down a total of 122 positive cases across the system. Here's what we noticed this week. We had been at fill rates for our staff, and that's across all operations as well as in the classrooms and in our schools. We had been at a fill rate about 45 to 50%, maybe slightly lower. And this week was the first time we bumped up to 75 or 74%. And so there was an article out of NPR talking about the recovery, and so we are hopeful that we may have hit the spike. Hopeful, hope was my word. I've used that more in the last 2 years, but we are hopeful that we've hit the spike, and we're going to hopefully see that drastic decline like they're talking about. But the district dashboard has been updated with that information. In addition, our COVID response team met, as we do every week. Our COVID response team meets every week. Every week, I have phone calls with our COVID nurse just to talk about daily, how are we doing? And we have received some questions around student return after 5 days. It's important to note that I'm not going to throw out a percentage, but the majority of cases that we see in particular in our elementary school, we know that our elementary students are cohorted and eating lunch in their classrooms. I'm not going to give the percentage. A majority of students who test positive have been in school that day or the day previous. And what we know is that those are some of the most infectious times of the virus. And so we are expecting that parents, if kids continue to exhibit symptoms, that students are kept home, that they're fever-free for 24 hours without medication. But we are trusting, and we have heard many stories of our younger students being asymptomatic and wanting to come back to school. And so provided a mask is worn, and we know in the classroom that's going to be difficult when kids are eating snack and eating lunch. But we also feel like 5 days off of that positive test that we're going to continue to push to have kids come back to school. But again, we are relying on our parents and families to make sure that kids are returning well and that symptoms are improving. And that really is my update. Thank you.
Okay. Next item is 10.0, future meeting dates, and they are February 3rd, 2022 will be held here at this will be a workshop meeting, and it will be held at the District Service Center. And February 17th, we have a school board meeting, business meeting, and that will be held at the District Service Center at 6:30 p.m. And the next item is 11.0, and that is the adjournment. We're done. We're done.